That means thousands of victims are suffering in silence, with no route to justice. The appalling Solihull murder showed just how important police response to domestic abuse is, and where it falls short, the impact can be fatal. Will the Minister listen to Labour and put a domestic abuse specialist in 999 control rooms so that the most at-risk victims can be identified and helped quickly?
Minister.
I'm very grateful for the honourable member for raising this. If I can remind the House that it is this government that has acted in the most robust way possible. The landmark Domestic Abuse Act was brought in April 2021. But this is about many things. It's about prevention. It's about education, supporting victims, pursuing perpetrators, doing good old-fashioned police work sensitively. And I'll take no lessons from the opposition in relation to this sort of issue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The levels of racist and sexist abuse uncovered in the London Fire Brigade are truly shocking. The independent review tells of women having to run a daily gauntlet of sexist abuse. One woman even received video calls from a man exposing himself. Incidents like this amount to nothing less than misogynistic hate crimes. So will this finally be the wake-up call this government needs to class misogyny as a hate crime in law?
I do look forward to Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, tackling this issue. He's been rather slow on it. This government is fundamentally in support of proper education to protect people, including women and all other vulnerable people within the force. But really, I think the opposition need to look at their own leaders first. This government will continue to work hard.
Caroline Noakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In one more week, it will be exactly a year since the Law Commission recommended that public sexual harassment be made a specific crime. Can my honourable friend let the House know whether she agrees with Plan International, the Girl Guides, the Soroptimists, Our Streets Now and many other organisations, and will either be backing the private member's bill on public sexual harassment or bringing forward her own legislation?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her campaigning and work in this area. I am always very impressed when people like organisations like the Girl Guides say something. It usually has merit. I would ask the Honourable Lady to be just very slightly more patient, because I'm hoping for some news in this space very soon.
Shadow Minister Annalise Dodds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following White Ribbon Day on Friday, we remember all victims and survivors of violence against women and girls. Only 1.5% of reported rape and sexual violence offences resulted in a conviction last year. The Minister's right. Tackling this requires multiple actions, but it requires multiple actions this government refuses to take, sadly, in her responses instead seeking to pass the buck. So may I ask 3 straight questions? Why will the government not introduce the following measures: specialist rape courts, rape and domestic abuse specialists in every police force, and the domestic violence register that Labour has called for? Thank you.
Minister.
This government has undertaken a very committed review of this area. The government has committed to the end-to-end rape review of adult crime. No adult rape crime victim should be left without a phone, for example, for more than 24 hours. We are on track to deliver many of these new initiatives, and this is work that's going across government department. You've asked about, the Honourable Lady has asked about special rape courts. Can I just say that as a practising barrister for 30 years, I expect all courts to deal with rape properly. All these issues are serious and will be addressed.
Annalise Dodds. Annalise Dodds. Oh no. Neil Griffiths, Dame Neil Griffiths.
Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will answer questions 3 and 4 together. This government is committed to protecting people from these practices. We are carefully considering the responses to the public consultation on banning conversion practices, which closed this year. We will set out next steps and the government's response in due course.
Neil Griffiths.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's a deeply disappointing answer, because every day that the Secretary of State delays this bill, LGBT individuals can be subject to this abhorrent and deeply damaging conversion therapy. And it's now 8 months since the consultation closed and 4 years since the government first promised a ban. So I beg the Secretary of State to bring forward a bill as soon as possible. Now, can she also reassure us that the government's proposed legislation will bring in a comprehensive ban on all forms of conversion therapy and include the protection of trans people?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. This is a very serious issue, and one of the reasons why it is taking so long is because we are being very considered. Many of the things that people asked for when we first started talking about conversion therapy practices have widened, are different from what we are looking at now. So it's widened in scope. But more importantly, what I would like to reassure LGBT people on is that these are issues that we can tackle with existing law. So we are being very careful in terms of our considerations of what will be coming into the bill, and the answer which she is requesting will follow on from the consultation, and that will come in due course.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A lot of words and no action, because in 2018 a promise was made that conversion practices would be banned. 4 years and 4 Prime Ministers later, and this disastrous Tory government are going backwards, with some on their benches actively fanning the flames of hatred and bigotry towards trans people. So can I ask when this Tory government are going to follow the lead of our SNP government in Scotland and take action to ban conversion practices and stop putting trans people's lives at risk?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady from the SNP is of course talking absolute nonsense. We on this side of the House, are legislators. What we are going to do is bring a robust bill into law, not one that is going to be helpful for her to send her tweets. This is about looking after vulnerable people, not about social media campaigning.
Peter Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend understand the anxiety by the LGBT community when it comes to this ban? This ban has appeared in multiple Queen's speeches, and yet we are still to see any draft legislation.
Secretary.
My honourable friend asks a very good question. I do understand the anxiety, and one of the things that I'm trying to do is take a lot of the heat out of the debate. Questions like that, which seek to inflame anxiety and make people worried about what we're doing, are not helpful. What I can tell him is that this is something that I am committed to doing. He is right that we have raised it multiple times and have promised multiple times, but the reason why it is taking so long is because this is not as simple as members opposite would like it to be. This is a very, very complex area, and when we do it, we're going to do it right and permanently.
James Gray.
Mr. Speaker, my constituent Paula Wren is proud to be trans and proud to be a Conservative, and she would call straightforwardly for an end to this absurd practice of conversion therapy. It's completely unnecessary for trans people, and the sooner the government can bring in this bill, the better it'll be.
I agree with my honourable friend.
We now come to SNP spokesperson Kirsty Oswald.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Last year, the former Prime Minister, that's the most recent former Prime Minister, described conversion therapy as an abhorrent practice in the ministerial foreword to their consultation on banning conversion therapy. Now, 11% of trans people in the UK report having been subjected to this so-called therapy by their own families. And those individuals who are subjected to this practice are significantly more likely to have attempted suicide than their peers. So I'm disappointed in what I've heard today, which seems like more kicking into the long grass. And does the Right Honourable Lady understand that conversion therapy is abhorrent? And if so, why won't her government commit to preventing this harm to trans people by banning this practice for everyone?
Mr. Speaker, I think it's quite clear that the Honourable Lady did not hear any of the answers I've given, because she's asked something which I have answered multiple times. So I would refer her to the answer I gave to all the members who've asked.
Liz Twist.
Question 5, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Department continues to review how health disparities can be addressed. In relation to the Health Disparities White Paper, further information will be available in due course.
Liz Twist.
There's a 20-year health gap in healthy life expectancy between those who live in the most deprived areas of the country compared with those who live in the least. And in Gateshead, my local authority, healthy life expectancy is 57.9 for men and 58.5 for women, compared to the national average of over 63 years. In its 2019 manifesto, the Conservative Party promised to increase healthy life expectancy by 5 years by 2035. Will the Minister come clean and admit today that, according to the ONS figures, the government's not on track to hit these figures?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, this is the first government to actually want to tackle health disparities which have been in place for generations. It is true that a woman born in Blackpool can expect to live 8 fewer years than someone in Wokingham, but that is why in the Levelling Up White Paper it included a Levelling Up health mission to narrow the gap in health life expectancy between local areas by 2030. And I'd refer to the Honourable Lady to the Core 20+5 work that's been done by NHS England, which is tackling the 20% most deprived communities with the 5 single largest health indicators which are expanding that health disparities.
Joe Gideon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Minister agree with me that the Health Disparities White Paper is fundamentally an equalities white paper and it's about levelling up? So areas like Stoke-on-Trent, where we have significant issues around affordable, healthy food and an obesity emergency, need to have the knowledge that within the white paper we have the recommendations as were put forward by the National Food Strategy.
Minister.
Well, of course, the Health Disparities White Paper is important, but work has started on disparities already. As I set out, the NHS has already launched the Core 20+5. That's the 20% of most deprived communities being targeted with interventions in the 5 most clinical significant areas. That's in maternity, in mental health, in respiratory disease, in cancer, in hypertension. So work has started already, and I know that that's a particular interest in areas like Stoke.
Shadow Minister Yasmin Qureshi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A new World Health Organization study published in The Lancet found that poorer women in Britain have some of the highest cancer death rates in Europe. Income levels should not be the marker of someone's chances of getting and dying from cancer. Does the Minister recognise that this is not acceptable? And will she commit to cross-government strategy that tackles health inequalities?
Well, I refer the Shadow Minister to the work that this government is already doing. As I've said, cancer in particular is one of the 5 core areas where we're investing significant resources to diagnose people earlier. She may be interested in the lung cancer detection vans, which are going to those communities with the highest incidence rates of lung cancer and the poorer outcomes. And we're seeing 70% of those people being detected with stage 1 or 2 cancer, significantly improving their life expectancy.
Jerry.
Number 6, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I just confirm the government's commitment to the empowerment of women in the workplace? Over the last number of years, women in full-time work have increased in number and the gender pay gap has fallen considerably. But there is more work to be done, and we've announced groundbreaking pay transparency pilots, a number of new returners programmes and our task force of women-led high-growth enterprises.
Joanna Cherry.
I thank the Minister for her answer. The outgoing Vice-Chancellor of Oxford University, Professor Dame Louise Richardson, says she has been shaken by the level of threat and harassment experienced by female academics. To be clear, this is not sexual harassment, but it's harassment of female academics because of their belief, in particular their belief that sex matters and their refusal to agree with extreme gender identity ideology. This harassment often comes from students and third parties, and it's not confined to universities. It exists in other workplaces. Can the Minister tell me what the government are doing to address this sort of harassment in the workplace?
Well, can I thank the Honourable and Learned Lady for her work in this space? It's vitally important. And I want to just point her to the Workplace Harassment Private Members Bill that the Honourable Member for Bath is putting through with government support that will explicitly put in legal protections from workplace harassment from third parties in particular, and the employer will have a duty to make sure that doesn't happen. I look forward to working with her on that bill as well.
Deborah Miller.
Sexual harassment disproportionately affects women in work. And back in 2020, the government survey showed that half of those who reported sexual harassment at work were asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement which effectively silences victims. To support more women in work, will my honourable friend look at rolling out more widely the Education Secretary's successful campaign to stamp out the use of non-disclosure agreements in universities so more women can benefit from this approach the government's already undertaken?
My right honourable friend for her work in this place. Of course I will speak to my education counterpart about this issue, but I just want to reassure her that there is specific legislation about harassment and sexual harassment in the workplace that is going through at the moment with government support.
Now come to Topicals, Dame Griffith.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker, the Equality and Human Rights Commission is key to the advancement of equality in this country, which is why we welcome the UN's recent re-accreditation of it as an A-status national human rights institution. To support Baroness Faulkner and her board, I will shortly be appointing new commissioners and deputy chairs to the Commission. The new commissioners will bring complementary expertise and experience to support the Equality and Human Rights Commission in upholding and advancing equality and human rights across the United Kingdom.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Well, very early on in the COVID pandemic, the Welsh Government commissioned a survey, a study, which proved and showed how the health inequalities affected people from black and ethnic minorities far worse, not just for any inverted commas supposed medical reasons, but for many, many social reasons. And so I would like to ask the Secretary of State, what is she doing to try to put right that situation where we have the social inequalities leading to health inequalities in the black and ethnic minority population?
The Honourable Lady may not be aware of the extensive 18-month piece of work that I produced on COVID disparities, and some of the things she mentioned were picked up in that report and in the recommendations, one of which was around the Office for Health information and the Office for Health disparities, which is ongoing. So that would be the body that would look at many of the issues that she has raised.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's own research demonstrates a clear link between viewing violent pornography and violence against women and girls. More and more online pornography depicts gratuitous violence against women, and 50% of 12-year-olds have seen it. So what assessment has my right honourable friend made of the current and future impact of online pornography on the safety of women and girls? And does she think the online safety bill goes far enough to prevent children from seeing it?
My honourable friend raises an extremely important point, and I do agree with her. Protecting women and girls and preventing children from accessing harmful content, such as online pornography, is a priority for the government. And yes, the online safety bill will introduce new protections for women and girls online. Under the bill, all services will need to proactively remove and prevent users from being exposed to priority illegal content. And this does include the appalling illegal content that affects women and girls, such as revenge pornography and extreme pornography.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Qatar's record on LGBT+ rights, women's rights and the treatment of migrant workers mean it should never have been awarded the World Cup. While FIFA's capitulation over the One Love armband has been shameful, the least our LGBT+ fans could expect from our government is advice and support when travelling to matches. Yet there is no advice from the Foreign Office, nor the Government Equalities Office for LGBT+ fans, nor...
Secretary Loftus, these are topicals, please.
Qatar has repeatedly committed that everybody is welcome to the tournament. And as colleagues are aware, the Sports and Equalities Minister, my honourable friend, the member for Pudsey, is in Qatar. And I fully respect the decision he's taken to wear the One Love armband.
Dean Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When performing my physics research during my studies over 20 years ago, I was fortunate that my supervisor was an incredible female professor, Sue Bayliss. The impact she made on me and the work she did has encouraged me to support STEM for girls in all areas. So can my right honourable friend please confirm what steps they are taking to promote STEM in education and as a career pathway for girls, so that one day many more millions can inspire people like me?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank my honourable friend from Watford for all his work in this space? Just to reassure him to increase uptake in women and girls in STEM education, we're funding programmes such as Advanced Mathematics Support, the Advanced Maths Premium, Stimulating Physics Network and the Inclusion in Schools project. And we're already seeing a 50% increase in the number of women taking higher education STEM courses since 2011.
Oksana Begum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this cost of living crisis, will the government commit to an emergency domestic abuse fund so that all survivors can access help with fleeing an abuser, so that no one is left choosing between ongoing abuse and violence or poverty and hunger?
Secretary.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. We have set out the multiple ways in which we are supporting vulnerable people, but if she has a more specific, I'm afraid I didn't get all of her question, but she has a more specific issue that she would want us to look at, if she would write to me or a Treasury Minister, then we could look into it in more detail.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Will my right honourable friend update the House on what the government is doing to support women starting up small businesses?
Minister.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for her work in this area? It's crucial that we get more women starting up their own businesses. We anticipate that that would increase, bring in £250 billion to the UK economy. The task force that we've asked Anne Bowden to lead will be making recommendations to government in the new year. But we know that venture capital is a huge problem, stopping women starting a new business. For every £1 of venture capital given to a new business, only a penny of that goes to women, whereas 89 pence goes to men.
Mr. Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Equality Act does not have the legal teeth needed for enforcement of the law. The responsibility falls entirely on the discriminated individuals to pursue legal redress. Will the Minister meet with the guide dogs for the Blind Association to discuss their Open Doors campaign and stop the shame that is nearly 3/4 of guide dogs owners reporting an access refusal in the last 12 months?
Well, I'm very grateful for the... Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would be absolutely delighted to meet with guide dogs to talk about that campaign. They're an important stakeholder in the disability sector, and we will make sure that that meeting to discuss it happens.
Vital Fabricant.
My right honourable friend will have seen the news today that between 400 and 500 migrant workers were killed building the stadia in Qatar. Does this not make FIFA's decision to choose Qatar as a location even more ridiculous? And will she join me in condemning FIFA in the way that they have kowtowed to the government of Qatar in relation to their anti-LGBT bullying?
My honourable friend raises an excellent point. Ministers and senior officials have raised the concerns of LGBT visitors with Qatari authorities at all levels and will continue to engage on the issue during the World Cup. And in fact, my Minister for Equalities, the member for Pudsey, is out there supporting LGBT people and continuing the engagement to ensure that they are protected.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Black and ethnic minority students are proportionately higher within further education colleges, but the number of black and ethnic minority lecturers is small and the number of black and ethnic minority college leaders is tiny. So what is the government actually doing to address this?
Mr. Speaker, he asks an excellent question. This is one of the issues which we looked at in our Inclusive Britain strategy. The Department for Education and the Equality Department are working to ensure that we do get the right proportion and representation of people in the education sector. He is right that there is an underrepresentation, and we need to look at the ways within the Equality Act, such as a positive action, in order to help address that and balance.
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I would like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. We now start with questions of Prime Minister Tommy Shepherd.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure colleagues from around the House will want to join me in congratulating England on last night, commending Wales for inspiring millions, and also wishing everyone a happy St Andrew's Day. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Tommy Shepherd.
In 2014, his predecessor David Cameron signed up to the Smith Commission, which promised, amongst other things, that nothing in its report would prevent Scotland becoming an independent country should the people of Scotland so choose. Can I ask the Prime Minister, does he share that view? And if he does, and in light of last week's Supreme Court judgment, will he bring forward legislation to allow that choice to be exercised?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we did have that conversation not so many years ago. It was described as a once-in-a-generation referendum. But and we discussed this last week. I think what the people of Scotland want is for us to be working constructively together to focus on their priorities. That's indeed what we're doing in his own area, investing hundreds of millions of pounds in a growth deal and ensuring that with a new concert hall we can enshrine Edinburgh's reputation as a city of culture.
Sir Paul Beresford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've just returned from the South Pacific and I found there a deep... I've resisted the All Black jokes, Mr. Speaker, but I found there a deep concern at the expanding tentacles of Communist China. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that China is more than just, as he put it, a systemic challenge, but in fact an expanding, serious geopolitical threat?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, China is indeed a country with fundamentally different values to ours and an authoritarian leadership intent on reshaping the international order, but actions speak louder than words. And that's why we passed the new National Security and Investment Act. Just recently, we used that act to block the sale of Newport Wafer Fab. And this week, with our announcement of Sizewell C, we ensured that China's state-owned Nuclear Energy Corporation will no longer be a part of the project. This government making sure that we protect our country's security.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I join the Prime Minister in saying, well done, England. And I hope we can say that next week and the week after. Commiserations to Wales, so I'm sure we'll be back in the World Cup tournament before too long. And of course, Mr. Speaker, we mark that tomorrow is World AIDS Day. Mr. Speaker, Winchester College has a rowing club, a rifle club, an extensive art collection. They charge over £45,000 a year in fees. Why did he hand them nearly £6 million of taxpayers' money this year in what his Levelling Up Secretary calls egregious state support?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased he wants to talk about schools, because we've recently announced billions more funding for our schools. We're helping millions of the most disadvantaged children catch up with their lost learning. And we're driving up school standards, Mr. Speaker. But during COVID, he wanted to keep schools closed. We shouldn't be surprised because I listen to parents and he listens to his union paymasters.
Mr. Speaker, his Levelling Up Secretary, I see him down there, who, after all, was Education Secretary for 4 years, said you could scarcely find a better way of ending burning injustices than scrapping these handouts. And here's why, and he talks about driving up standards. Just down the road in Southampton, and he'll know this, 4 in every 10 pupils fail their English or Maths GCSE this year. 4 in 10. Is that £6 million of taxpayers' money better spent on rifle ranges in Winchester or driving up standards in Southampton?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, he talks about school standards. It's under a Conservative government, and thanks to the reforms of the former Education Secretary, that now almost 90% of schools are good or outstanding. But Mr. Speaker, whenever he attacks me about where I went to school, he is attacking the hard-working aspiration of millions of people in this country. He's attacking people like my parents, Mr. Speaker. This is a country that believes in opportunity, not resentment. He doesn't understand that, and that's why he's not fit to lead.
Mr. Speaker, if he thinks the route to better education in this country is tax breaks for private schools in the hope they might hand some of that down to state schools, that's laughable. Trickle-down education is nonsense. And Mr. Speaker, it's not just the Levelling Up Secretary. His Education Minister sitting there asks, how much better would it be if Conservatives got rid of these handouts? He talks about his record. It's simple. He can carry on being pushed around by the lobbyists, giving away £1.7 billion to private schools every year, or we can put that money to good use. In the Tory scandal, he talks about his record. Hundreds of thousands of children leaving school without the qualifications that they need. I've made my choice. What's his?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we're improving school standards for every pupil in this country. It's our reforms that are leading to us marching up the PISA league tables for reading, for writing, more good and outstanding schools, more investment in every single school. But he talks about choice. This is about supporting aspiration, Mr. Speaker, and that's what this government is proud to do.
Keir Starmer. Mr. Speaker, he really does need to get out more. And he talks about aspiration. Mr. Speaker, they are killing off aspiration in this country, and it's not just education. Why is the dream of home ownership far more remote now than it was when his party came into power 12 years ago?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what have we done in those 12 years? The highest number of new homes started in 15 years. Largest number of first-time buyers in 20 years. He talked about 10 years ago. What do we inherit? The lowest level of house building in a century.
Mr. Speaker, would you believe it? Mr. Speaker, the simple fact is this. Every year, the age at which people can buy their first home goes up. At this rate, under this government, a child born in the UK today wouldn't be able to buy their first home until they're 45. Now, I love my kids, but I don't want to cook them dinner in 30 years' time. Now, Mr. Speaker, I've heard he's having a relaunch. Apparently, it's called Operation Get Tough. So how tough is he going to get with his backbenchers who are blocking the new homes this country so badly needs?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're delivering record numbers of new homes under this government. That's what we're doing. He talks about toughness, Mr. Speaker. He's too weak to stop dozens of his own MPs joining the picket lines. So what, if he wants to support those hard-working families and show some leadership, why doesn't he confirm right now that no Labour MPs are going to join those picket lines?
Keir Starmer. Mr. Speaker, whichever way you slice it, it's always the same. Whether it's private schools, oil giants, or those who don't pay their taxes here, every week he hands out cash to those that don't need it. Every week he gets pushed around, and every week he gets weaker. But I can help him with this one. He doesn't need to do another grubby deal. If he wants to defeat that amendment from his anti-growth backbenchers on national targets for housing, Labour will lend him the votes to do so. Country before party, that's the Labour way. Why doesn't he try it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think we did hear too weak to confirm no one on the picket line. But Mr. Speaker, it's the same old Labour ideas: more debt, more inflation, more strikes, and more migration. He tells his party what they want to hear. I'll take the difficult decisions for this country, and that's the choice, Mr. Speaker. It's the politics of yesterday with him, or the future of the country with me.
As host of this week's International PSVI conference, the UK again highlighted the need for more action to prevent sexual violence in conflict. With heart-rending accounts of women in Ukraine being brutalised in this way, and reports that a third of women in conflict zones can be victims, will the Prime Minister champion with me as his Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief the work being undertaken with young people across the world to prevent religion or belief being weaponised, which can later manifest into sexual violence in conflict?
Prime Minister.
I'm incredibly grateful to my honourable friend for her dedicated work in this area. And she's absolutely right to highlight that this week the UK hosted the Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict Initiative Conference. It was an incredible success. I pay tribute to all those involved, and as she said, we managed to reach a new political declaration in the conference where over 50 different countries have agreed to put an end to sexual violence in conflict, and she deserves praise for all her work in this area.
Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the whole House will want to join me in sending prayers and condolences to the wife of Doddy Weir, who sadly passed away at the weekend. The absolute giant of a man, an inspirational figure in Scottish rugby, and someone who raised £8 million for M&D charities over the course of the last 6 years. Our thoughts and prayers are with Cathy, with Hamish, with Angus and with Ben. Mr. Speaker, let me wish everyone a happy St Andrew's Day. And those that know anything about St Andrew know that he's not just the patron of Scotland, he's celebrated right across Europe. That is why it is such a sad sight to watch this Prime Minister rammed through a bill that would rip up 4,000 pieces of European law, laws that protect workers' rights, food standards and environmental protections. And it's an even worse sight watching the leader of the Labour Party desperately trying to out-Brexit the Prime Minister, ruling out freedom of movement and any hope of a Swiss-style deal. Brexit is now the elephant in the room that neither the Tories or Labour are willing to confront. When will the Prime Minister finally see reality and admit that Brexit is a significant long-term cause of the UK economic crisis?
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I start by joining my honourable friend in offering our condolences to the family and friends of Doddy Weir, and I'd also like to pay tribute to him for his campaign to raise awareness of MND, which has made a big difference. Now, Mr. Speaker, straightforwardly, I was proud to support Brexit. It was the right thing for this country. It allows us to, first of all, get control of our borders, which is incredibly important, and reduce migration, all of which, Mr. Speaker, I noticed what he said, and I agree with him, actually, about the slight dexterity of the Leader of the Opposition on these topics of free movement. And I know he'll join me in reminding the Leader of Opposition about his previous promise to defend free movement of people, not something that we support, Mr. Speaker, but we're also seizing the economic opportunities, deregulating and signing trade deals around the world. That's how we'll drive growth and prosperity.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for his remarks on Doddy Weir, but once again what we're seeing over Brexit is better together. We're used to that in Scotland. The problem for both the Prime Minister and the Labour leader is that when it comes to Brexit, even their own voters don't agree with them. The last YouGov poll showed a record 56% now believe it was wrong to leave the European Union, and that figure is 71% in Scotland. 1 in 5 who actually voted for Brexit have now changed their minds. More and more people across these islands are wise to the fact that "Make Brexit Work" is just another stupid slogan. But Scotland can't be stuck with a new Brexit Together coalition of the Tories and Labour. So on this St Andrew's Day, can the Prime Minister finally tell people in Scotland the democratic path to escape Westminster control, to deliver independence, so we can get back to the European Union?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about democracy and votes. I think the difference between him and I is that I respect the result of referendums. He talks about this. Just remember one thing, Mr. Speaker. We had the fastest vaccine rollout in the world. We had that because of our freedoms after leaving the European Union.
Well, Palsy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, manufacturing remains a key part of the UK economy, and for the West Midlands, that means automotive. That's important in my constituency of Rugby, which includes firms in the supply chain and workers at Jaguar Land Rover. With the move to all new cars sold in the UK to become electric by 2030, means that it's critical for us to have a site for battery manufacture. Assembly is already taking place elsewhere in the world where batteries are made. So will the Prime Minister give his support to the bid for a gigafactory in Coventry?
Prime Minister.
I pay tribute to my honourable friend's efforts to progress this project. We're fully committed, Mr. Speaker, to securing investment to grow our electric vehicle supply chain. Now, although he'll know I can't comment on individual commercial negotiations, we did announce in the Net Zero Strategy £350 million of funding in the Automotive Transformation Fund to support the development of that supply chain, and I wish him every success in his bid.
Colin Eastwood.
Yesterday, BBC Northern Ireland announced cuts to programming and jobs at BBC Radio Foyle that, in my view, will leave the station totally unsustainable. The BBC Charter places an obligation on that organisation to allow audiences to fully engage on local issues. This decision, in my view, is a very clear breach of that obligation, leaving licence fee payers outside the Greater Belfast area without proper local programming. Will the Prime Minister act to defend this very important local public broadcasting service?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I believe very strongly in local public broadcasting, and indeed the government has taken steps to support local media. I'll be very happy to look at the specific issue he raises and bring it up with the BBC when I next see them.
Angela Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Guildford tell me they want women and girls to feel safe, and I'm delighted to have had some successes in getting lights turned back on, including on York East Bridge on behalf of concerned students at the University of Surrey. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that even in difficult times we cannot take a single step back from the brilliant work this Conservative government is doing to tackle violence against women and girls?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, like my honourable friend, the government is committed to tackling violence against women and girls and making our streets safer. We've created the Safer Streets Fund, which funds additional patrols, extra lighting and more CCTV. And indeed, the Street Safe online tool allows users, including those in her constituency, to pinpoint locations where they feel unsafe so that the local police can take appropriate action. And I'll continue to support her in her efforts.
Abhinav Pongasari. Here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The two boys, 16-year-old boys, Charlie Bartolo and Kiani Sianko, were tragically killed in my constituency of Erith-and-Thamesmead this weekend. My heart goes out to the families and friends left behind. We really need to come across the House to address and tackle serious youth violence. So can I ask the Prime Minister what he is doing to address knife crime epidemic?
Here. Prime Minister.
I thank the honourable lady for her question and join her in expressing my condolences to the family and friends of the two boys. I also read about it. It's an awful tragedy. She rightly asked what we are doing to make our streets safer and stamp out the scourge of night crime. We're boosting the number of police officers, as she'll know, 15,000 on our way to 20,000, and we're also giving them the powers they need to get knives off our streets, including lifting restrictions on stop and search and introducing new court orders to target known knife offenders. I agree with her, this is something we need to do more on, and she should know that the government will be fully committed to tackling it.
Gordon Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When will my right honourable friend's government bring forward any emergency legislation that's needed to deport those migrants who came across the Channel illegally in small boats and are now being put up in hotels paid for by hard-pressed British taxpayers?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are determined to do whatever it takes to break the business model of people smugglers who are causing the needless loss of life of people across the Channel and putting unsustainable pressure on our asylum system. Our Nationality and Borders Act, opposed by the party opposite, Mr. Speaker, gives us new powers which we fully intend to use, and we will take further measures as required to properly control our borders and reduce the number of illegal crossings.
Andy McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was sad to see in a video from his Oxford days the future Prime Minister saying he hadn't a single friend who was working class. And he's not likely to make any soon, because while he sits on a personal fortune, he's refusing the reasonable demands of nurses, railway workers and many others forced to take industrial action just to make ends meet. Why doesn't he give them the wage increases they need and fund it by making the rich pay the same rate on unearned income as workers have to pay for their hard graft? And whilst he's at it, why not scrap the non-dumb tax loophole that he's all too familiar with, which is costing the public £3.2 billion?
Mr. Speaker, I have nothing but admiration and gratitude to our nurses for all the work they do. But Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, it is simply unreasonable and unaffordable to have a 19% pay rise. Now, if that's what the honourable gentleman thinks is, I'm sure the Labour Party can explain to us how they would pay for that and the impact it would have on inflation. But I tell you this, Mr. Speaker, if he really wants to support working people, maybe he should get off the picket line and end the strikes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The train service between Wilmslow in my constituency and London was always hourly, direct, and took 1 hour 50. Now, you'd be very lucky if you got a direct train, and the journey time is double, or often double. And that's not restricted to strike days, that's day in, day out on Avanti trains. So can the Prime Minister tell my constituents what the government's going to do to sort this out and get the West Coast service back to what it used to be, because the service at the moment is completely unacceptable?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right about the unacceptable deterioration in the quality of Avanti's service. The Transport Secretary is rightly monitoring and holding them to account. There is a plan to increase the number of trains to 100 additional drivers, Mr. Speaker, and restoring the full direct service between Manchester and London. But what this plan needs, Mr. Speaker, and I hope the party opposite support it, is trade union cooperation.
Lyra Wilson. Rubbish. You lot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure members opposite felt a certain sense of déjà vu watching the Welsh defence during last night's match. After all, they know what it feels like to have Marcus Rashford run rings round them. Mr. Speaker, off the pitch, Marcus Rashford has been a tireless campaigner on child hunger. Yeah. So, in the face of fierce Conservative opposition. Yeah. So, will the Prime Minister, given that he delivered on the pitch last night, will the Prime Minister give him the best thanks possible by delivering free school meals for every child living in poverty?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're supporting almost 2 million children with free school meals. We also, last year, invested hundreds of millions of pounds in the new holiday activity and food programme, which is broadening that support through the holidays for those kids who need it, on top of our work to roll out breakfast clubs across the country.
Blake Drummond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The pandemic has played havoc with school attendance, and the Children's Commissioner says that almost 115,000 children are now being home educated, a 34% higher than before the pandemic, with little, if any, monitoring of their educational welfare. Even worse, 9 in 10 local authorities believe they have not been able to identify home-educated children. So when will my right honourable friend be bringing forward the register of homeschooled children so they're identified and we can be sure that their needs are looked after and they're not falling through the net?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we support the right of parents to home-educate their children, and we know many do well. But however, this is not the case for all, and that's why local authorities must seek to identify those children missing education. We've published guidance on the arrangements they should be following, and indeed make sure that they have oversight of elective home education.
Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. After record payouts last year to shareholders, the Royal Mail recently this year announced huge half-year losses and plans to cut 10,000 jobs, while threatening the cherished universal service obligation, which guarantees a minimum 6-day-a-week letter delivery service in the tradition of the black penny from 1840. Why has his government not yet committed to investigate the mismanagement and cack-handed mismanagement of this iconic British service and protecting its future and loyal postal workers?
Mr. Speaker, again, I have nothing but gratitude and appreciation for the hard work of our postal workers. But when it is not the right approach. It is not the right approach to go on strike, especially demanding pay, as we have heard, that is simply unaffordable for hard-working British taxpayers. The Honourable Lady would do well to see that, because in the context that we're in, it is simply not possible to give people the type of pay demands that they are making.
Andrew Percy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Due to the unique geography of Briggangool and the Isle of Axholme, we are one of the most flood-prone areas of the country. So whilst I welcome the record £5.4 billion of flood defence funding, can I ask the Prime Minister, ahead of next year's budget, to look at easing the rules around how that money is spent, so more of it can be spent on maintenance, which is so important to keeping my constituents dry?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to look at that for my honourable friend. He's right to highlight the doubling of the investment that this government has put in flood defences, but it's right that we get the mix right between that, and I'll take that away with him.
Liam Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The West Midlands Chief Constable has revealed that a vulnerable child was forced to spend 2 days living in a police station during a mental health crisis because the right specialist help could not be found for him. I know more and more young people are unable to access appropriate support for mental health. Will he accept Labour's plans to scrap private school charitable status and use the money to fund a mental health professional in every school?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd say to the honourable lady, we've already committed to offer all state schools a grant to train a senior mental health lead by the end of this Parliament. Already 6 out of 10 have doing so. There's funding for all of them to have it. In addition to that, we're increasing the support that we give to those with eating disorders, because she's right, mental health does affect young people. This government is backing those people to get the support that they need.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The number of people crossing the Channel is a national emergency. The number of migrants in hotels is a national emergency. Isn't it time we had a Cobra-style committee involving the DWP, DLUC, the Home Office and led by Number 10 to tackle this crisis?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I share my honourable friend's frustration, and I want to reassure him that we will do whatever it takes to reduce the number of illegal crossings to this country, take any new powers that we need to. I look forward to working with him to ensure we can do that, because this is fundamentally about our sovereignty, Mr. Speaker, and the proper control of our borders. Whilst the Labour Party have tried to oppose every measure we have taken, we will keep going, because we need to make sure that we stop the crossings.
Kirsten Oswald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the UK Government's Regulatory Policy Committee stated that the retained EU law bill is not fit for purpose. The Institute for Directors, the TUC and countless others have urged the Government to scrap the bill. And businesses across Scotland have already suffered severe economic damage under this Tory Brexit agenda, and they now see the outlook clouded with even more complexity and uncertainty. If the Prime Minister is serious about protecting the economy and looking after SMEs, why not do the right thing and scrap this disastrous ideological bill now?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, actually taking advantage of our freedoms is going to drive growth and jobs and prosperity in the United Kingdom. Whether it's in life sciences, whether it's reducing the burdens on data for those SMEs, whether it's in the financial services industry in Scotland, that's how we're going to create prosperity across this nation, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we're going to get on and deregulate post-Brexit.
I'm going to come again, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend and the Chancellor have rightly pointed out that levelling up is for the whole of the United Kingdom. And as a Southampton man, my right honourable friend will know that since the 1970s, Eastleigh has been promised a much-needed Chickenhall Lane bypass. So will he agree to meet me and Hampshire County Council to finally get this project moving?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's right that we spread opportunity across the country, including in Eastleigh and the South. I understand that it's for Hampshire County Council to bring forward the proposal for the bypass, which I hope they do at the next funding opportunity, and I'll ensure that my honourable friend and the Council have a meeting with the Transport Minister as soon as possible.
Final question on Brock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tory ideology has blocked onshore wind development in Scotland for years. Peterhead carbon capture clusters lost out in funding twice and still only classed as a reserve. Pump storage hydro schemes have been blocked because the UK Government won't discuss a pricing mechanism. If the Prime Minister actually does care about net zero and cares about Scottish jobs, will at least take action to advance Peterhead CCS and pump storage hydro in Scotland?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, not only are we supporting in this country carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, offshore wind, all new technologies that will help us get to net zero, all of which will create jobs in Scotland, we're also supporting our transition, Mr. Speaker, and that's good for the Scottish economy and it's good for Scottish jobs and something the SNP would do well to support.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. Let us start with the urgent question. Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster if he will provide an update on the appointment of an independent adviser on ministerial interests and enforcement of the ministerial code.
Where is he? Where is he?
Minister.
Hello, Mr. Speaker. The government welcomes the opportunity to stress again the importance of the role of the independent adviser and this government's commitment to it. The Prime Minister has been very clear that the appointment of a new independent adviser is a priority and that the appointment process is underway. Honourable members will understand that appointment of this nature is significant and has to be done well. Much as honourable members might wish me to, it would not be appropriate for me to comment further on specifics of what is an ongoing appointments process. Let me assure honourable members the adjudication of issues of ministerial conduct does not stop because the independent adviser is not yet in post. Conduct matters and conduct issues will be dealt with quickly and appropriately, irrespective of that appointment process. This is what honourable members will have seen with regards to the complaints made against the Deputy Prime Minister. On receipt of formal complaints by the Cabinet Office, the Prime Minister requested an independent investigation to be conducted by an individual from outside government, and Adam Tolley QC has been appointed to conduct the investigation, and the terms of reference have now been published. The process is underway and Mr Tolley will provide his report to the MP in due course. It is right that these matters are investigated fully, but it would not be right to comment further on them with that process ongoing. I'd also like to reassure honourable members that the process of managing the interests of ministers continues in the absence of an independent adviser. The Permanent Secretary, as the policy expert on each department's remit, leads the process in their department in the absence of an independent adviser. And the Cabinet Office is able to provide advice in line with precedent. All relevant interests are declared by ministers upon taking office and are kept up to date at all times. The publication of the list of ministers' interests is the end point of the ministerial interest process and takes place at regular intervals to make the public aware of the relevant interests of ministers. I'll end by reiterating that as soon as there is an update on the process to appoint an independent adviser on ministers' interests, the government will update the House.
Angela Red.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting this urgent question. And how many times have I heard soon, jam tomorrow, mañana, mañana? We need the Prime Minister who promised to appoint an independent ethics adviser as one of his first acts to actually deal with this issue. Yet despite ministers accused of bullying and intimidation or reappointed despite security breaches, still no adviser. And it's clear that ethics and integrity isn't a priority for them, despite the Prime Minister's words. And we're told that recruitment is underway, but apparently no one will accept this poison chalice. So can he tell us today how many candidates have been approached and how many have refused the job? Will the Prime Minister follow his disgraced predecessors by denying the so-called independent adviser the power to launch their own investigations? Or does the Prime Minister have no plan to restore standards and will just preserve the rotten regime that he inherited? And what on earth is the system in the meantime? Who will investigate the allegations of Islamophobia made by one of his serving ministers against another? He mentions the Deputy Prime Minister, who had to demand an investigation into himself because the Prime Minister was too weak to do so. And how many formal complaints have now been made? The Minister mentions Adam Tolley. Why is he not allowed to proactively investigate the so-called informal complaints? Will he investigate allegations made by the former Permanent Secretary? And who will finally get to the bottom of the dangerous use of private emails by ministers? Number 10 said in reference to the Home Secretary that they could not investigate breaches under previous administrations. But, Mr Speaker, that's what's happening now with the Deputy Prime Minister, so why not? So why now is there an excuse for refusing to investigate the Home Secretary's breach? Will the Prime Minister appoint a truly independent watchdog?
Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and it's wonderful to hear the honourable lady's interest in this matter today. We had, as it happens, a debate on this very issue in Westminster Hall yesterday. And the House will be shocked to hear that...
Minister, I'm here. I'm not over there. And I hate to say there's nobody even standing on that side, so please, come on.
Thank you for the reminder, Mr Speaker. The House will be shocked to hear that the honourable lady was not present at that Westminster Hall debate. Nor because it was about the ministerial code, about the subject of the urgent question today, and the honourable lady and her honourable friends did not bother to show up. They missed the opportunity to hear the honourable member for Rhondda speak very pertinently on this subject. But not only was the honourable lady there, her colleagues on the front bench did not turn up to ask questions either. Now, the honourable lady refers to rumours in the press. But let us look at the facts. The Prime Minister has been in office for 31 days. On his first day, he said he would make an appointment. He has made repeated assurances in this place and in other places, as have members of the Cabinet. Continuing to the debate yesterday, Prime Minister's questions yesterday, and this urgent question today, she talks about the powers of the independent adviser, but I remind her that in May this year, Lord Geit said that we had come up with a workable scheme. And so I have to say that it's starting to sound very much like the opposition can't take yes for an answer. We're going to have an independent adviser, they're going to have the powers that they need, and they are going to be appointed very soon.
SNP spokesperson Stuart Hulsey.
Mr Deputy Speaker, when the Government published their policy paper on revisions to the Ministerial Code on the 27th of May, it said there would be an enhanced process for the initiation of investigations under the Ministerial Code, that the independent adviser could initiate his or her own investigation, there would be a more specific reference to the adviser in the Ministerial Code, and there would be a duty on ministers to provide all of the information necessary to allow the adviser to discharge his or her duties. However, it turns out the Prime Minister is not offering potential candidates any enhanced powers, meaning advisers would not be able to launch their own investigations, and that confirms the blocking of the expansion of powers by his predecessor. So it's a simple question. Why is the Government reneging on its own policy statement of May this year, making it more difficult to appoint an independent adviser?
I refer the honourable gentleman to the answer I gave a few moments ago. Lord Geit, as he seems terribly well informed, but he seems to have stopped short of reading Lord Geit's response to the changes in the terms of reference, where he said this would be a workable scheme.
Then he resigned.
Cavan Jones.
Hear what the Minister says, but could he give any timescale of when the appointment will be made? And in the meantime, can I ask him specifically in terms of the use of private email and WhatsApp groups? What advice has been given to ministers on this, and also, more importantly, also their special advisors?
As I've said, there is a process ongoing to appoint an independent advisor as fast as possible. Prime Minister has been in post for 31 days, and there is standing advice on the use of WhatsApp and private messaging.
Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, can you confirm whether the fee paid to Adam Tolley KC to investigate the claims that you mentioned earlier, can you confirm whether it's greater than the projected annual cost of an ethics advisor?
Minister.
I don't know the answer to that question. I'm happy to write to the lady on the to answer.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Notwithstanding the Minister's earlier comments, we've waited for 5 months now for an ethics advisor. So the government, every time the government fails to appoint one, it further undermines and corrodes this place's reputation in the public mind. I have tabled a bill giving Parliament, which would give Parliament the power to appoint an ethics advisor if the government failed. So, given the government's inability to appoint an ethics advisor, would you now please support that bill and allow us to get on with re-establishing the good reputation of this place?
Minister.
The honourable lady will have heard me point out this Prime Minister, who has said he will appoint an independent advisor, has only been in post for 31 days, that there is a process going on at speed. And in answer to her other question, it is very much the view of this government that it is the Prime Minister who appoints the independent advisor to give advice to the Prime Minister, who answers ultimately to Parliament.
Andrew Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Since I became an MP in 2010, we've seen 7 current or former Labour MPs given custodial sentences, 2 Conservatives, 1 Liberal Democrat and 1 Scottish Nationalist. We have countless other cases that come before the House, and this member for Rhondda has spoken eloquently about this previously. We have a by-election tomorrow caused by a Labour MP standing down in disgrace. So I think there is a big issue to solve in standards in our public life, and it goes right across this House. So I've been pleased that my friend the Minister has been able to update the House on the recruitment process underway. Does he agree that backing a stronger code of conduct for members of Parliament is proof that the government is taking code of conduct in this place seriously?
It's very good to hear from my honourable friend. He's absolutely right. This government takes the code of conduct of members extremely seriously.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the absence of the ethics advisor, can the Minister inform the House of the status of the inquiry into Islamophobia that was ordered in January this year?
I know that the next independent advisor will want to take that case extremely seriously.
Ronnie Cowan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think it's important to point out that the Prime Minister appoints his own ethics advisor. He then determines which investigations can be undertaken, and then he determines what outcomes are taken, what actions are taken, depending on the outcome. Is this maybe why the last 2 ethics advisors have resigned?
So he'll have heard me say several times in reference to whether an independent advisor can initiate proceedings that Lord Geidt was happy with the proposals made in May. He said this would be a workable scheme.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This is a really serious issue, and it does undermine confidence in the ethics of this place and the government. On the Public Administration Constitutional Affairs Committee, 2 days after which, when Lord Geidt gave his evidence, he resigned under our questioning. I think that needs to be taken seriously. We are still very concerned about this, and the process of appointment, Lord Geidt was alighted upon, and also the remit. Will he commit to perhaps, if he doesn't want to do this in public, meeting with the Public Affairs Constitutional Affairs Committee, that could be in private, to discuss the process of this if there is no movement on this issue in the next couple of weeks?
Minister.
I'm confident that an independent advisor will be appointed very soon, so I'm not sure there'll be a need for such a meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Isn't it in the best interests of ethics for the ethics advisor to be completely independent of the Prime Minister?
Mr. Prime Minister. The question was, be independent of the Prime Minister, basically.
It is an independent advisor, but it is an independent advisor appointed by the Prime Minister because ultimately, in our system, the Prime Minister has ultimate responsibility.
Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Ethics Advisor is required to publish an annual report every year setting out their work so the public can see, alongside the list of ministerial interests twice a year, setting out the relevant private interests of all government ministers. Can the Minister inform us whether we can expect a report this year, and if so, who's drafting it?
An independent advisor is going to be appointed in the very near future, and it will be at the very top of their list, I'm sure, to get the ministerial interest published.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was at the Honourable Member for Ronda's debate yesterday, where he very rightly pointed out the differentiation between the members' code of conduct and register that we have here and what ministers have. And just to reiterate what the Honourable Member for Luton said, you know, we had the last printing of the ministerial register in end of May. Today is the 30th of November. If we're going to be kind to the government, that is 6 months today. Surely it's not unreasonable to expect that standards list to come as soon as possible.
Well, I have to give credit to the Honourable Lady because she was at the debate yesterday, unlike any of the Labour members present. And she will have heard me say then that, as I've just said now, that there is that we will have an independent advisor very soon, and that they will be expected to prioritise the publication of ministerial interests.
Jim Ship.
Mr Speaker, can I thank the Minister very much for his responses. There are concerns that there is currently no ethics advisor to the PM. The post has been vacant for some 6 months, so there is urgency. So can the Minister confirm the independent advisor will be appointed, the timescale for that to happen, so that the correct workings of Parliament for ministers can refer to for guidance and for any assistance and advice that they need?
It's always a pleasure to answer questions from the honourable gentleman. He'll have heard me say that we are in the process of appointing an independent advisor at speed, and they will be able to deal with all the relevant issues once they're appointed.
That completes that urgent question. We come to the next one. Colin Lockhart.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
You want to let the House go first?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy if he will make a statement on the Energy Bill Support Scheme payment for Northern Ireland. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. The Northern Ireland Energy Bill Support Scheme will provide £400 to households in Northern Ireland this winter. In addition, of course, it has been decided that the alternative fuel payment of an additional £200 will, unlike in Great Britain, be paid to every household in Northern Ireland, and that is, of course, because of the high preponderance of use of, in particular, heating oil in Northern Ireland. And on top of those supports, there is, of course, support being provided to households in Northern Ireland already, automatically through the energy price guarantee, which brings about an automatic reduction in bills. Now, of course, energy is devolved, Mr Speaker, and this scheme should have been administered by the executive in Northern Ireland. That's why in Great Britain, my department has been working since February to deal with what is a very complex and challenging task. We don't live in a centralised database society, and standing up this support has proved extremely challenging. It wasn't until August that the executive asked HMG, and thus my department, to take on the responsibility for this, which is one of the reasons why we have been behind. There's also, of course, a different system and a different regulator, and as I say, because energy is devolved, it wasn't a system with which BEIS was used to having to work on a day-to-day basis. We have since that time identified that we needed powers, which we lacked in the Northern Ireland context, and we were able to seek those powers through emergency legislation, through the Energy Prices Act. We've then sought to find the right way to get through to consumers in Northern Ireland, find the right route, and we've found that working through suppliers, because of their established relationships, is the best way, if not the only way we can identify that we can realistically and in a reasonable time frame reach consumers in Northern Ireland. So by using those systems, we hope to be able to expedite delivery. But they are a different set of suppliers than in Great Britain, and they have their own processes which need to be adapted in order to deliver this. And detailed work is underway to establish how suppliers can use their systems to pass funds to consumers in a way that will meet consumer needs and ensure public money is properly protected. And this is where the biggest issue has come about, is because I would like to see, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to see the AFP and the EBSS added together so that £600 payment can go to households in Northern Ireland, and I want it to be available this winter for their use to meet heating oil bills, meet the cost of living crisis this winter. What I don't want to have is a stranded electricity credit that they may not use up until the following winter. And that has been the crux of the challenge dealing with suppliers, and that is what we're working on to make sure that...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I sincerely thank you for granting this urgent question. It is a question asked on behalf of the people of Northern Ireland, for whom the cost of living crisis is biting as much as it is in other parts of our United Kingdom. Yet, Mr. Speaker, whilst across GB households have received their energy bill support payment, my constituents and people right across Northern Ireland have not. £400 has been dangled in front of them but remains beyond their grasp. The promise of an additional £200 in recognition of our dependence on heating oil also remains unpaid. The previous Prime Minister assured the people of Northern Ireland that the payment would be issued in November. Today, November draws to a close and no payment. Hard-pressed families budgeting for the additional pressures of Christmas factored this government's promise into their budgeting. What has the Minister to say to these families? Mr. Speaker, as temperatures have plummeted over recent days, people in Northern Ireland are waking up to frost on their cars outside, but inside their homes some people can even see their breath because they're unable to turn their heating on. They need this payment, and yet what we get from the government is delay, doubt, differing stories as to the type of scheme as each day passes. It is not good enough. We need a firm commitment from the government that this payment will be issued before Christmas. We know it can be done. We saw through COVID that where there's a will, government can overcome technicalities quickly to deliver support. Mr. Speaker, the UK government have been centrally delivering this scheme for England, Scotland and Wales. The UK government say the budget is there to issue it for Northern Ireland. The energy companies say they are ready to administer. Can the Minister clarify the exact form the payment will take and when it will come? Furthermore, if by changing the model, as indicated yesterday, by which the scheme is delivered, will it create a further delay? And when can people expect the payment? I implore you, Minister, no more delay. Make the payment and honour the commitments given to the people of Northern Ireland.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, of course, as I said, energy is devolved, and I understand why her party is not part of that executive, but it has consequences. And that meant that we did not start until August, and we should not be doing this. The executive in Northern Ireland should be doing it. That is the truth. I met with CEOs of the energy suppliers last week. Whatever she may have heard, they are not ready. Their systems do not allow the dispensing, the cashing out, and I hope she agrees with me. I don't want to see a stranded credit to an electricity account that people can't access. I have insisted that we find a way to make sure that people can cash that out and use it to meet their heating oil bills this winter. That is my insistence. We had a roundtable on Monday with my officials with the suppliers. Again yesterday. I'm receiving daily updates, and I'm determined to find a way to ensure that we can allow cashing out this winter. But in answer to the Honourable Lady's question, I do not see, given the situation, given that late handing over from the executive to us, given the situation with suppliers, that we are going to be able to stand that up before Christmas. But we are aiming to stand that up in January if we possibly can. That is my aspiration and my aim, and that is what I'm seeking to achieve.
Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate the member for Upper Bann for being granted this urgent question. I want to put on record some statistics from the Northern Ireland Consumer Council to give some context to what we're talking about today. 44% of households in Northern Ireland have no savings compared to the UK average of 16%. Households in Northern Ireland are the most vulnerable in our country to the cost of living crisis, with a weekly discretionary spend of £93 compared to the UK average of £204. And even with the government's measures, the University of York estimates that more than 10 million families will be in fuel poverty And under the new government's plans, bills will rise £900 to £3,000 on average from April. That would mean 18 million households in fuel poverty across the UK, with Northern Ireland hit amongst the hardest. To make matters worse, 2/3 of households in Northern Ireland use heating oil and so are not supported by the energy price guarantee. Providing support for households in Northern Ireland should have been a priority, as they will be hit harder by the rise in energy bills. Instead, the government seems to have forgotten them. The energy market is complicated, but the government has been aware of these issues for 6 months. It was back in May that the Chief Secretary to the Treasury wrote in the Belfast newsletter and promised that the government was urgently working to ensure that the people of Northern Ireland receive the equivalent of the energy bill support as soon as possible. But since then, there's been very little sign that the government has been working on the issue at all. A task force was set up in August, which has only met twice, and the former Prime Minister, during her very short tenure, told people in Northern Ireland that it would be delivered in November. We're on 30th of November today, I think I'm right in saying. It is not good enough to let this issue drift. The Northern Ireland utility regulator said in August that he believed there was a simple mechanism to get the money out, and he had been left frustrated that the government hadn't taken this forward. So can the Minister please explain why this option put forward by the Northern Ireland utility regulator has not been taken forward, and how much longer people in Northern Ireland will have to wait for this support?
Minister.